All right, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Stress Recovery Ninja, and today I want to talk to you about the last call for the MTHFR crash course. Today, John and I will be going over any questions that you guys have, last minute questions. We're going to be talking about the different types of folates when you get your blood tested and you look at the folate level, or you look at the different kinds of folates that make up folates so that you can get some insights onto that. B12, what happens when my B12 levels are really, really high and I'm not taking any B12? What's going on there? How do I get that lower? And then really tying up a lot of the loose ends as it relates to exhaustion, fatigue, not being able to focus and concentrate, mood disorders, not being able to sleep, crashing in the middle of the day, not handling your stressors, having to take different types of medications to support your body, thyroid problems. I'd like to talk a little bit about thyroid today, about autoimmunities. I think autoimmunities will be great as well. So we're just going to find John, see where he is, see if I can get him to join in on the conversation, and we can kind of go from there. But it's going to be super amazing. We are going to be providing you guys with a lot of different handouts that you can take and print off and know what different types of supplements that would be best for you, how to approach your doctor, what questions do you need to ask, what are the best tests, what tests should I be looking for if I have this, that, or the other. And so that's what's really, really great about this. So let me see if I can find John and if he is on, because I don't see him. But hi, Angie, I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you have any questions, because a lot of people don't understand specifically what this course is about and whether or not it's good for them if they're dealing with a exhausted, burnt out problem and they've done a salivary saliva test, double salivary. They've done a salivary cortisol test and they are waiting to say, no, I have no idea what that even is. So that's what this course is about, is to explain that genetic component. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. You look like you're dressed to be warm out. Is it cold?
Yeah, it's a little chilly in Atlanta here. We had a little bit of a cold dip, so I went out this morning. It was a little cold and dipping down, so I never took this off.
It's always good. So yeah. So you and I were texting a little bit, talking about talking about the folates and B12 when it goes high. But you know what? We never really talked about, John. I was figuring is the whole autoimmune component. How rampant autoimmune is and how the CDC almost doesn't even keep contact or keep an idea on all of these different kinds of autoimmunities, and how does the genetic component play into that. And so why don't we just kind of, and I also told anyone who's attending this today can just ask whatever questions that they may have so that we can really keep this session interactive today. So why don't we just kind of go right off the cusp and talk about the different folates and the question that you got asked today and you thought, oh, that'd be a great topic to talk about.
Yeah, so it's really something I hear all the time, and it kind of sparked my thought process of okay, another topic we can chat about. Because I actually had two patients today that had a little bit of confusion on what folate or folic acid means, because there's a little bit of misconception when you are reading things or their doctor's telling you, or they have labs that reflect folate/folic acid and what that means. And so realistically, there is a difference between folate, folic acid, folinic acid, and methylfolate. And then there's other kind of derivatives of folates as well. But those are the four main kind of players that you hear about. And there's a lot of misconception, and people use the terminology interchangeable. And so when somebody's got an MTHFR defect and their doctor may have a consideration of saying, all right, you just got to increase folic acid, which may not be the right way to go. Or what I had today was one patient specifically that they had some blood work done by their integrative MD in the fall, and they have an MTHFR defect, and the doctor ran their B12 as well as their folate/folic acid levels and told them that they were methylating properly. And then I look at the lab component. Yes, their B12 was optimal, but their folate levels said greater than 20. Okay, and the first issue with that is we don't know what the lab means by folate, because they'll list it as folate, parenthesis, folic acid, close parenthesis, and folate levels from lab to lab varies. And so one lab's definition of folate, what they measure, could be different than the next lab. And some labs measure folic acid, other labs measure a combination of folate, folic acid, and folinic acid. So there's a lot of variations in what the labs are measuring. And so if I see a patient with an MTHFR defect and they have a folate of greater than 20, that's not normal, because the thing is the lab stops counting at 20. So are their folate levels 21 or are their folate levels 2000? And so there is a sweet spot for folate levels. If you're talking about folate levels, I like my patients to have it somewhere around 12 from an optimal side of things, because the thing is, if you've got in your blood serum, okay, and that's what these markers are measuring, how much folate or folic acid is outside your cells hanging around the serum, and you've got folate levels that are greater than 20, well, that may be a problem, because not enough dietary folates or folic acids get into the cells to be able to methylate properly, and then in turn can lead into all the chronic symptoms or autoimmunity that arise. And so one thing I always, have patients, understand is, from a lab side of things, what does that lab mean by folic acid? So is looking at things like folate and B12 levels from your standard labs like LabCorp and Quest, are those actually reliable markers, or we basically just have to discredit them and throw them away, which in my opinion, I don't think they really give you much information. And I know, Joel, you see this where you have patients come in with their B12 levels are really high, really low, and they're making a assumption based on that you're deficient or you're doing too much. It doesn't tell you anything about methylation or B12 levels in the cell. It's really a poor marker to assess your nutrient or your vitamin B12 or B9 status based on those labs. And so one thing I really, really quickly always tell patients is give them a quick tutorial on the difference between folate, folic acid, folinic acid, and methylfolate, especially if they have an MTHFR defect. So just to kind of run down real quick to keep it simplistic, and in our MTHFR crash course, we're going to go through this a little bit more in depth, is basically folate is what you get from foods. Okay, so you get your folate from dietary sources, and that's things like leafy green vegetables, asparagus, legumes, eggs, citrus fruit, beets. There's a whole lot of foods that are high in dietary folates. Folic acid, which is in most kind of below standard B vitamins in a lot of like prenatal formulations, it's fortified in a lot of foods we eat, is actually a manufactured form. So it's not the dietary form. And so the problem with folic acid is that people with MTHFR defects or even other issues in their folate pathways are taking supplements or eating a lot of foods that are fortified with folic acid, and the body cannot metabolize folic acid very effectively. And we know in turn that folic acid is actually an inhibitor or a stressor that can actually shut down your folate pathway, as well as some other pathways, and then lead to that fuel on the fire when it deals with detox or methylation activity or autoimmune process. So folic acid to me is a big no-no with a lot of patients because of a lot of the variables, and a lot of people go into it not understanding the difference between folate and folic acid, and there is a significant difference between the two. The other piece of this is, methylfolate, which is what people get, that bypasses that MTHFR gene, which is more bioavailable form. And people that have the MTHFR defects tend to just try and load up on the methylfolate, which sometimes is beneficial and sometimes not. But the thing is you need methylfolate to detox. And so there's different forms of vitamin B9. And then one thing that is I think a big missing piece of this whole story with the folates is, and I see this all the time, is somebody has an MTHFR defect and they're told that because of the defect, they just need a supplement with methylfolate. That is fine, but the thing is you still need dietary folates in the mix because you need your folate pathway to make things like folinic acid, which is a derivative of folate. And folinic acid is so vital for making your DNA and RNA. And so basically how your body can heal, how your body can make proteins, how your body can make enzymes. So you need folinic acid to fuel this. And so when we talk about MTHFR defects, there's a huge kind of misnomer there that because of an MTHFR gene mutation, you can just take methylfolate and completely bypass your folate pathway and you're good to go. There are key components in your folate pathway, like making folinic acid, that are essential for function. And we talk about like autoimmunity and chronic infections. It's like you need adequate DNA and RNA transcription, and you need that folinic acid to do that. And one thing we will talk about in the MTHFR crash course is in my top 15 genes, there's a gene called SHMT. And that gene is dependent on recycling your folates, but also making folinic acid. And some of those people that have chronic issues with autoimmune components could have deficiencies in those SHMT genes where they can't make adequate glycine to be able to make folinic acid and make glutathione. And so that's sometimes a big player. So kind of one of my pet peeves with this is I see, people getting diagnosed with MTHFR defects and just thinking they can load up on folinic acid and it's a set it and forget it, when there's so many other vital pieces to this. You need the dietary folates, you need adequate glycine metabolism, you need the folinic acid for your DNA and RNA. And so it's more than just MTHFR and methylfolate, close the book, you're done. There's other intricacies in this that are sometimes huge missing pieces into why people aren't recovering. And like I said, just in today, I had 2 people coming in, MTHFR, hey, your folate levels are great, you're methylating properly, their folate levels are over 20, they're not understanding the difference between folate and folic acid. One of them, their doctor just said, hey, we need to increase the amount of folic acid you're taking, not understanding where that folic acid is going to inhibit other pieces or slow down their pieces in their folate pathway. And the thing is people are so misguided and ill, educated on kind of the big picture of this. And that's why, this course, we're going to, the first week, we're going to kind of hammer home in terms of the big picture with this. If you have MTHFR, it's not just methylfolate. There's other pieces that you have to consider to truly heal and recover.
Yeah, and I'll read Angie's question, who I think that John just kind of answered that question, Angie, and we'll get there in a second. I'll read it. But basically, think of it as that you can go wrong in a bunch of different ways if you don't know the biochemistry by just recommending folic, or by just recommending folinic, or just by recommending methylfolate. Because somewhere in that whole recycling where it's a circle and it's got to make its way around, it's not going to be able to make its way around if you push in the wrong direction. And that's where we can support you with that. And of course, the same thing I see too, John, is with just the value of homocysteine, right? I mean, 0 to 15, right? I've yet to see one, 2, 3. I've seen a 4 in a young child, of homocysteine, but it's amazing. That's a big player too, which we can talk about. But I'm gonna read Angie's question and see if we can answer it. I was told to avoid. So I have a double C677T homozygous. I was told to avoid folic acid and I need B-methylated folate, which is what you just talked about. Is this true? My family doctor doesn't believe in adrenal fatigue, therefore I don't know what to do. My cortisol is high at night, so I have a hard time falling asleep, but trying to wake up is like pulling teeth. I'm pre-diabetic, insulin resistant. My hormones have to be out of whack based on hot flashes, libido, menstrual cycles. However, my doctor keeps saying I'm in the normal range. I feel like I'm keep running into a brick wall. So, yeah, just carrying on what you just kind of mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's like, I listened to that and I think that's kind of like a huge kind of big picture scenario of everything we're going to cover in the MTHFR crash course. Because when you're talking about, the first part of that, 2 mutations of an MTHFR defect, yes, you need methylfolate, but based on the other things I talked about, you need to make sure there's adequate dietary folates. Maybe you need to restrict foods that are enriched or fortified with folic acid, because you need the folinic acid component and the recycling aspect for folinic acid. But then kind of get into the adrenal fatigue aspect where, with the symptoms you talked about from a hormonal side of things, the whole idea with MTHFR and methylfolate being able to be pushing your methionine cycle to methylate is to make SAMe. And so then what's going to happen with that is, SAMe production or methylation function is going to regulate your dopamine and serotonin, which then is going to have a neurological impact on regulation of hormones like adrenal hormones. The methylation activity is also going to regulate the clearance of adrenal. So we're talking about adrenal fatigue and sleep issues. Adrenal fatigue, what's that backup plan? Release adrenaline Okay. And so that adrenaline conversion is going to be something that can play into some of the insomnia issues, things like that. And you need methylation activity to clear that. And then also you need the methylation activity to be able to clear things like histamine. And so it's kind of like this whole, big picture story when you're talking about MTHFR defect and how it can lead to adrenal fatigue, how it can lead to hormonal dysregulation issues, how it can lead to insomnia issues. It is so vital for adequate methylation activity, and everybody kind of gets stuck in this kind of like, one set of lens scenario, MTHFR, methylfolate, all your prayers are answered. Well, yes, that's a piece of it, but there's more to it. And so, in response to that, it's like, yes, the methylfolate is needed because that can lead into adrenal fatigue recovery due to methylation activity in terms of regulating some of those, excitatory based chemicals. But the thing is it's so much more than that. And it's simply not just methylfolate by itself. It's kind of big picture component in terms of how these all things kind of interact and work together. And then, I know you wanted to talk about the homocysteine, so we'll talk about that here in a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I was going to just carry on from that, John, because, this page is the adrenal fatigue recovery page. And I had two Dutch reviews today where the adrenaline levels, actually, first of all, the HPA axis was completely shut down and it was below normal, as was the free fraction. But then you look at the adrenaline markers and they're super high. And I think that's important to talk about right now, where your body does have a backup plan where when that HPA axis gets shut down because of chronic repetitive stressors from immune problems, from life load, from blood sugar imbalances, from physical traumas, ultimately it will shut down that HPA axis, and your body will be able to still mount a stress response more effectively by producing adrenaline, which is needed, which is, you have to have methylation activity to help make that, but you also, more importantly, need methylation activity to help clear that out. So basically what John was saying is, with the question of having 2 copies of that homozygous, do I need to take methylfolate? Yeah, it's part of the equation, but what else is going on downstream because of the compensatory mechanisms that we'll teach you about? Because if you aren't recycling that methylfolate, you are not going to clear out that adrenaline. It just becomes a vicious cycle. So, Carol, I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well. I haven't seen you in a long time. Where you would check to see if you have an MTHFR defect is through different types of genetic testing, which we'll be going over the different ones that you can get in the MTHFR crash course. Ancestry testing, Ancestry.com, 23andMe have them. They're not as complete as some of the other ones, but it's still suffice. And that's what you would need to do. What would you add to that?
Yeah,
John?
and the thing is like, we're talking about MTHFR and how that plays into it. And I know we've talked about this, and I kind of scream from the hilltops because basically people come to me because they're diagnosed with an MTHFR defect. So you can get an MTHFR test through basic blood draws. There's different cheap swabs out there, things you can kind of find online. We're going to have some of those things available on websites for people to order directly pretty soon here as well, to be able to check just for MTHFR, do more advanced testing. That's something that'll probably be available hopefully in the next couple of weeks as well. So when we have that available, we'll kind of come back to this and talk about some of those aspects. But MTHFR, yes, it's important, but you will hear me screaming from the hilltops, you're doing an injustice by checking MTHFR alone. Okay. Yes, it gives you the answer to the MTHFR story, but when you're talking about genetics, and if you want to figure out how genetic factors are playing into your chronic health issues, looking at MTHFR alone is doing a complete injustice to yourself. And I know, Joel, you've repeated this analogy that I use, and I continue to use it because it makes sense, is that Harry Potter series. It's like you have that whole Harry Potter series of books, and you open the first book, read page 1, and page 1 talks about MTHFR. You close book 1, and you say, I know how all this is going to end without reading the rest of the books or cheating and watch the movies, okay? And knowing how this whole story is going to end. It's a complete injustice. You're trying to assess how your body works from a methylation, from a detox, from a neurochemistry, from a hormonal regulation aspect, from an antioxidant production, based on one gene, the MTHFR gene, on a sea of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of genes that are involved, and many of them are bigger players. And like we talked about this MTHFR crash course, and we talked about this over the last couple of weeks in terms of deal breakers. Like I said, I have a top 10 list. I have a top 25 list, okay? In my top 10 to top 15 list, MTHFR is not in my top 10 to top 15. Yes, it makes my top 25 list, but in terms of the important genes that are the bigger players that I see day in, day out with patients that are affected, that we can actually go in and support and make change where that they are trending in the right direction and getting their life back, MTHFR is important, but it is not the biggest fish in the sea. And that's the biggest thing is and that's why people come to me, is because they're checked for MTHFR and they realize real quickly that it's not the answer. So one of these patients I was talking about with the definitions of folate, they came in today, and one of the things is they were diagnosed with MTHFR by their medical doctor, and their doctor prescribed them 15 grams of Deplin, because she had depression issues and the MTHFR was a connection. She took the Deplin dose, and then within one day, didn't sleep for a week. And then anxiety through the roof. So basically completely blew her out of the water because there's other issues. And this person has homozygous COMT genes that work fast. She has GAD enzyme variants. She has MAOA, and she also has QDPR genes, which deals with bioptin recycling. So basically, the methylfolate was like drinking from a fire hose for her. And yes, she had depression, but basically it blew her out of the water, where it drove so much adrenaline and so much of a sympathetic response that it really jacked her up for a week. And now we know the full picture, and now it's like, okay, we're talking about layering some methylfolate back into the mix, and she's panicking because she knows how that affected her the first time. But we have these other things in place now that kind of affect those things further downstream, which are bigger players over the MTHFR, which now we can come in and add those methylated B vitamins at maybe a lower dose and be able to support front-end methylation and detox components because we got balance into the system. So MTHFR is vital. It's huge information to know, but understand there's more to the story than just MTHFR.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot of comments in here, John. It is a lot to understand, Carol. It is really difficult. And so that's why John and I have felt the need to put together this MTHFR crash course, where we thought that's a good name for helping to get those that at least know that term in the pipeline, so to speak. But in reality, it's how to live right for your genetic type is really what the name of the course should be. But that's the other thing too, Carol, is that because we've been doing this for so long and we have the insights, I guess we're going to be putting together some of the top lists, that you would ask your doctor to find out about the sniff test. And if I were to just come up with my top 3 to know that your doctor is just dabbling and doesn't know their butt from their elbow when it comes to MTHFR, is if number 1, they tell you to take folic acid, number 1. Number 2, if they tell you it doesn't look that bad. I've made a top 5 gene a video, John, where if your doctor, doesn't know what they're talking about when they say it doesn't look that bad. I mean, that's kind of like looking at, a couple of the first couple chapters of the book, and there's, 100 chapters, and saying it doesn't look that bad. And then the third one, which I think would be a huge mistake, is if you're talking to your doctor, and this unfortunately goes to a lot of functional medicine practitioners, and they tell you, okay, you just need to take methylfolate, because as John mentioned, if you have downstream problems where you're going to either clear something too quickly or you're going to clear something too slowly, and you just go ahead and blow the fish out of the water, so to speak, it's going to make you not sleep for a week, and that's hugely problematic. So that's what really the MTHFR crash course is going to be about. And John, what would you say to someone that doesn't have a gallbladder? Should they be concerned about methylation problems?
Oh, absolutely. From a standpoint, we were talking about methylation, but even beyond that, in terms of acetylation aspects, because when you're talking about, what's the function of a gallbladder, is to store bile so you can absorb fat. And so you need fat for hormones, you need fat for, so many byproducts, to kind of fuel the body. So typically when somebody is having a gallbladder, there's a lot of residual symptoms that piggyback that besides its digestion aspects. And so then there's the need for things like bile salts or ox bile, maybe increased vitamin B5 intake, other components to really kind of help the fatty acid, story, when there's, a gallbladder has been removed. So yeah, you were given a gallbladder for a reason, so, there's definitely a needed function of it. So when I have patients that have remove gallbladder, there's things we put in place to kind of offset lack of function, because a lot of the medical mindset is like, you don't need it, let's cut it out and you're good to go. But then people start developing chronic fatigue issues and malabsorption issues and brain fog issues, and the list can go on and on, post gallbladder surgery.
Yeah, and I think that has to go on our little Rolodex of, genetic gallbladder. What is it? Genetic for your genetic type, because that's a huge niche of people suffering with methylation issue that they don't know about, let alone that they needed the gallbladder. They don't know that there's a whole genetic component to it. I guess the last thing, John, maybe we can talk about it, also get into the homocysteine, is the autoimmune component. I know that's a huge rabbit hole. But how would we be able to give a couple really key distinctions of what does it mean to have an autoimmune problem, and how does that relate to a methylation or genetic susceptibility problem?
Yeah, because the thing is, when you're talking about autoimmunity, and not to get too technical with this, when you're talking about balance and immune function, that's really based on your TH17 regulatory system. It's dependent on glutathione, or it's dependent on vitamin D. Okay, and so when you're talking about methylation activity, one of the primary goals of methylation is to be able to fuel homocysteine to be able to make glutathione. And so if you've got issues with methylation activity or impaired methylation function, you in turn may have an impaired ability to make adequate glutathione levels based on the demand or based on the stress on the system, whatever those things that are driving autoimmune process in the first place. And so if you've got poor methylation and in turn poor ability to make adequate glutathione based on the need of the body, well, then in itself, you're going to have problems regulating your TH17 regulatory system, which then can kind of get your immune system stuck and drive that autoimmune cascade. And so, I know a lot of people out there that maybe work with our alternative practitioners, and they talk about autoimmunity, they talk about, hey, we need to put you on glutathione because you have an autoimmune issue. Well, yes, that's all fine and dandy. There could be some adverse effects of doing that, because you can get increased like sulfite accumulation, increased ammonia accumulation if you have some other genetic variants. But really kind of big picture with MTHFR methylation is make glutathione, and if you have an autoimmune issue, there's going to be more of a demand for adequate glutathione level to balance out immune function. And so there's that kind of like generalistic explanation of how the two are kind of intertwined together. And so somebody can go into it with, hey, they have a little genetic weakness, their glutathione levels get depleted, that autoimmune switch flips, but then they can't recover because of some of those genetic components to be able to kind of speed up and be able to buffer what's going on with the immune function to be able to balance things out.
Yeah, and I always try not to get too tricky in it and just look at the way that we're going to be presenting this course, John, and see the susceptibilities and overlap that with the environmental triggers and the micronutrient deficiencies and the things that slow down the enzyme, get those working better. And the next thing you know, your immune system gets more regulated, your antioxidant reserve builds up, your inflammatory cascade slows down, and you're working on the sort of the upstream mechanics of what's going wrong. John, Karen is a patient of mine. She asked, if I can ask, I have a histamine clearance question. For the past 5 days, I've stayed away from high histamine foods, and I've eaten foods that are supposed to clear histamine, and I've been itching like crazy, and I have 2 black eye allergy rings. Am I clearing too fast, or is this normal?
Well, when you're talking about like the dietary side with histamine clearing, by making the shift by decreasing low histamine based foods, or by decreasing the high histamine foods, basically what you're doing is you're just taking a stressor off the mix. You are decreasing your histamine burden, but if there are issues with methylation activity and SAMe production, then what can happen is you can't clear the histamine fast enough. And so sometimes what happens is if somebody makes kind of like the shift from a dietary side of things, well, then maybe the body kind of loosens the reins a little bit and is trying to speed up activity, but maybe can't do it based on the burden. So it's kind of a little bit of a person specific or a little bit complicated aspect. And so what I do with patients is knowing if there are histamine based things that maybe are driven by food components. Yes, making some of the dietary shifts is part of it, which decreases the burden, but you probably need to actually do some things to accelerate the histamine clearance based on the nutrient aspect. So it's kind of like sometimes you can't do one without the other. So whether if you've got those ABP1 genes and it's a diamine oxidase deficiency issue, then along with the decreased histamine load from a dietary side, maybe you got to give a little bit of diamine oxidase, or maybe you have to pulse some SAMe in, or do some things like quercetin or stinging nettle to be able to help clear out some of the histamine that is accumulated, based on that, because sometimes there's shifts in the body when you start reducing some of those stressors. I have seen that from time to time in patients that are maybe waiting to, get supplements, in that they maybe have ordered, some along those lines, and they start the dietary thing a few days before. To be honest with you, I really don't know the mechanism, the right reason why that happens, but I have seen it. And typically when you start adding the nutrient component that helps the degradation or the clearance of histamine along with the dietary shifts, usually those symptoms really start clearing up pretty quickly. My son gets a lot of allergic shiners under his eyes. And that's something that kind of gives me a telltale of kind of like where he's at with things, and what I kind of maybe ramp up on and pulse a little bit stronger nutrients in the mix based on that side of things. So I would definitely say there's two parts of it. Yes, there's a dietary shift which decreases that stressor. Think of the diet as the highway on the traffic, but we got to maybe increase some of the metabolism or degradation of histamine with base of those nutrients. And so if there's histamine issues and you're doing a low histamine diet, adding those nutrients will probably clear that out and take it to the next level, because I have seen it happen a couple of times.
Yeah, and she's like, they're on their way, and they are.
What's
on
that?
their way.
The DAO or?
The DAO.
Yeah,
the DAO.
Yeah, and the only to kind of add into that, and like I said, I don't know the exact mechanism, but what I think could be the component with that is, this is a little more complicated. I don't want to get too much into it, but we were talking about like mast cell activation kind of feeding forward into like mTOR activity, and this is kind of more for you, Joel, that kind of drives more inflammation. I think where that happens with people, if they kind of make a shift from a dietary side of things and maybe like histamine stuff ramps up, I think there's a mast cell component that's probably involved in that. So along with the DAO components, you may want to look at like luteolin as a bioflavonoid support that can kind of help, keep the mast cells a little bit more intact. That might be kind of at that next level of supports that person wants to do, because it may be more than just DAO enzymes, low histamine diet, if they're having that response. Because now just thinking back about the patients I've seen that actually did the low histamine diet and noticed certain symptoms ramp up until they got the histamine-based support in, pretty much all of them, I think, have had some type of like mast cell component on top of just the histamine clearance aspect as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I almost get the picture of when someone is having an explant surgery, or they're having their mercury amalgams removed, and you would think it's a good thing, but they're dumping, right? Like all of a sudden you are holding a lot of that stuff in suspension, and you have that sort of that reverse magnet that, so I kind of think about that too, where I agree with you. You need to have the lowering burden on the one hand in place, with the removing, accelerating on the other hand, so that you have the invisible things that make things speed up, because your body gets used to things, and that's what homeostasis is, right? It gets used to what it is. So
yep, it's like the body gets in a new normal, and like I said, so like even with like just the dietary changes alone, it's like, would things balance out with just more time? Very possibly, but you talk about that dumping. It's like I use that all the time with some of the biological dentists I work with, in terms of like when you have those amalgams removed, the body like innately realizes like that stressor is no longer there. and it says thank you, and it goes into like this massive clearing mechanism of maybe all stored histamine components. So like the body recognizes like, hey, you've decreased the amount of histamine-based foods. The body's saying thank you very much. Now we can try and kind of clear this stuff at a faster rate than we've been doing. And then maybe short term, it's going to increase maybe symptoms, but long term, it's going to be more beneficial for your body because you're removing a big stressor that is possibly leading to and causing chronic health issues day in, day out.
Yeah, and having the DAO just sort of minimizes that initial shock.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Right? That initial,
yep.
Yeah. All right, awesome. And then as far as, Anita wrote that it is complicated. No wonder I can't feel better. Anita, you know what? The body is very forgiving. I always say it's never too late. And I saw, John, you had a comment to someone. I don't remember what it was, but it's like the lungs that have been smoked upon for 50 years, and then you stop smoking, and then the next thing you know, 5-10 years later, you have a brand new set of lungs because you removed the stress. And I think that's the same thing with the body. It's very, very forgiving, and it wants to maintain an optimal, ideal level of health. But I look at it, John, as almost like you have these gears, like a watch. And that's what methylation cycles look like. And they have these little pegs in them that doesn't allow one gear to spin, and 5 gears down the line, it's impacted. But when you take that one little peg out of the wrench in the mechanic, so to speak, now the 5 gears down the line does start to improve because it's all a system. And that's the problem with specialty medicine, wouldn't you say, John? Like where it's just such a reductionistic, like I don't need to talk to the cardiologist. I'm an orthopedic, nothing to do with what I do. And it's like, well, yeah, it does. I mean, it has a lot to do with the immune response and with the nervous system and with the, endocrine system and with the orthopedic system. They all work together. And I think the MTHFR crash course is really helping the people speak a new language, Anita, that it is difficult, but we want to give you the short list of what you need to do to focus in on what's your main symptoms, what's your main susceptibilities with your genetic testing, and then what can we do to bridge the gap to where you are now and where you want to be and what's not happening for you to get there and make the huge difference. So I think that's what the benefit of this course is. John, any other you wanted to mention maybe a little bit about homocysteine, because some people have that on their radar as well. Like my homocysteine is normal, or my homocysteine is high. What's going on there?
Yeah. So, obviously homocysteine is one of those markers that's used in this methylation world to give you an idea of how well you're methylating in terms of, is there a need for, methylated B12, methylfolate to be able to clear homocysteine or recycle homocysteine. And so then the first kind of part of that is like your homocysteine is normal. What is normal? Based on the labs, normal is anything less than 15. Okay. And we know that there actually is an optimal or perfect range of homocysteine. I like to see people's homocysteine between 7 and 9. So if it's above 9, it's a concern. And if it's below 7, it's actually maybe even a bigger concern. Because when you're talking about autoimmune issues, if you have a homocysteine of 0, you're dead. So you need homocysteine. It's not a bad thing, but there is a spot for it. And so I've seen numerous patients come in with homocysteines like 3.5, 4, 5, 6. And then the question is, if homocysteine is that low, can they not put enough gas in the tank? And basically the methylation cycle or that methylation tank is completely empty? Or sometimes there's some of these other genetic variants like upregulated CBS enzymes, or they have an autoimmune process where their body is in such a state of flux that it's just sucking homocysteine to try and make glutathione, which leaves them with little homocysteine to be able to continue to recycle and methylate properly. And so, if anybody's listening to this and it's like homocysteine is something from a lab standpoint that is not normal, not between 7 or 9. It's like they've got to maybe do a little bit more investigative standpoints. The easy thing is like homocysteine 15 or above. Most of those people they need methyl B12. They need the methyl Bs because that homocysteine is just accumulating and getting stuck. Those are the easy questions. The hard, I think, part is when homocysteine is normal and there's chronic health issues and possibly impaired methylation status, or when homocysteine levels get below 7, because there's so many things that can happen, whether the immune system's under stress, you got an upregulated CBS enzyme, you can't put enough gas in the tank, and maybe there's a need for, pushing methylfolate, but if it's not that and you push methylfolate, you could increase sulfite and ammonia. And so that's where I think a lot of times, like, the chaos can happen. But realize homocysteine is not the be-all and all. It's one marker in this story, but it is an informative marker. So, if your doctor, and a lot of doctors pull homocysteine levels, even medical doctors that can routine physicals, that's something that can show up from time to time. So look at your homocysteine, optimal 7 to 9. If it's above 9 or below 7, you're going to want to check MTHFR, but you're going to want to check more than MTHFR to get insight into that, because it is a decent marker. That it's not the best marker, but it's a decent marker from a screening standpoint to give you an idea of methylation activity as a whole.
Yeah, and I got all these agendas besides getting people that are suffering with a chronic health condition the small little changes that can unlock their health mystery and make huge improvements. But the bigger picture is to make a paradigm shift in the healthcare model. To me, coming up with a lab range that is at least 6, like not 0. I mean, that's almost like insulting our intelligence when you see a 0. Like I say, 0, like you're the same. Really, that's what's saying is if you're 1, which I've yet to see a 1, let alone you'd have to be -1 to be flagged. You're 1 and I'm 12 and we're the same. It's just very, very frustrating. A couple other questions here. Trisha writes, could it be that B12 and folate taken for 2 years daily could have taken me out of Hashimoto's? I still have hypothyroid though.
Joel, you broke up. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. So she said here, could it be that methyl B12 and folate taken for 2 years daily could have taken me out of Hashimoto's? I still have hypothyroid though.
Well, absolutely. Because we were talking about just methylation. If there's impairment there and there's a need for those methylated vitamins, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Like when you have Hashimoto's or any autoimmune process, typically there's going to be more of a demand on glutathione to be able to regulate your Th17 system in terms of how you have those like T and B cells that balance out. And so what happens with like Hashimoto's or any autoimmune issue, think of it as like a teeter-totter. The teeter-totter swings and you get stuck somewhere, and balancing that teeter-totter out is dependent on glutathione and vitamin D. So if there's something that somebody goes into with Hashimoto's that's driven by any stressor, whether it be Epstein-Barr virus, chemical burden, fluoride toxicity, whatever it may be, and they take those methylated B vitamins, and that's the only piece of the puzzle that's affecting them, and they push methylation activity, which in turn replenishes their glutathione levels, and then what that does is then in time brings that teeter-totter back to balance. Yeah, you can go into a remissive state with Hashimoto's just by taking methylated vitamins, and if that's the case, because that's rarely the case, so that means that, okay, MTHFR maybe was a big player in the story for that person, and that can happen sometimes. So when you have an MTHFR defect, sometimes it is the big fish. Very rarely it is. So if you see something like that, we're just taking the methylcobalamin, methylfolate, change the immune function, and in turn put a Hashimoto's presentation into a remissive state, then awesome. Now, is it going to have an effect on your thyroid? Yeah, because we know MTHFR needs T4. We need T4 to activate riboflavin for your MTHFR to work. So if we're talking about now trying to preserve thyroid hormone, along with what you're doing with methyl B12 and methylfolate, maybe you got to ramp up the vitamin B2 intake, to take the stress off of thyroid function a little bit. So, I love hearing stories like that when somebody, it's kind of like, clear cut like that. But from a mechanism or biochemistry side of things, yeah, it can happen. It's great. Unfortunately, I don't see the patients where that happens, because usually they are, on the right path to recovery, and I'm usually the last doctor of the party when those things aren't working. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I listened to a lot of the old Dr. Marshall from PRL's his podcast. Have you ever listened to those, John? They're pretty
not in a while, but yeah.
I'll send you some of the drop boxes of them. But one of the things that kind of changed my life was the function of the thyroid hormone is upregulating oxygen concentration inside the cell. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense now, right? That the body would, I think we gotta talk a little bit about a cell danger, right? Because when the body's in danger and it's prioritizing its raw materials as to where are we gonna invest the most important, most important systems of the body, procreation and even some of the other functions take a back seat to just being able to, you know, regulate your ability to keep your temperature, beat your heart, you know, be able to go up and down with your blood pressure. And then you see the thyroid slow down on purpose. And then we go in there and bamboozle the thyroid with more medication to upregulate oxygen. But it's almost amazing the way that the body regulates itself, John, where it shuts itself off on purpose, right? If there's inflammation, it really protects
Absolutely.
itself. Maybe I guess you could talk a little bit about that as well, how that.
Well, you know, you really kind of explained just like kind of the big picture of that, and then, you know, to kind of expand on that, like you said, the body's pretty amazing in terms of doing things for a reason. And so maybe the last thing we want to do is say, oh, your T4 levels are low, let's just pound you with, you know, thyroid hormone. And we always talk about this, Joel, of taking a step back, looking at that 30,000 foot view and asking why. You know, why is T4 low? You know, why is that component, you know, why is this blood marker abnormal? And instead of looking at everything in isolation or through one set of lenses, looking at the big picture. And I think that's what really gravitates me towards this genetic stuff, because to do this genetic stuff right, you have to look at the big picture. You have to look at how, you know, all these different variables are interacting together. When you're talking about kind of that cell danger response in terms of how the body is going to respond, you know, the way it's supposed to based on the environment, it is how all these things are interacting. And so then it's a question is like, you talk to somebody about this got thyroid issues, and it's just like their doctor's chasing a number, you know, without taking that step back and asking why. Is that in turn kind of adding more traffic to the highway? And in my opinion, you know, 90% of the time it is. You know, and so, you know, I think it's really, you know, and that's why I'm excited about this MTHFR crash course, because it's really giving people kind of like that 30,000 foot view and really teaching them how to kind of understand some foundational things and how to start connecting the dots on some of these things.
Yeah, and if I were to give my little soundbite on what I think the MTHFR crash course really is, all summed up in a nutshell, is that we look at the roadmap of how your body is set up to make energy, and we see where some of the bottlenecks are, and then we look at your life and we look at where maybe some of the perfect storms are overlapping with those bottlenecks, and really give you a alternative route to be able to get to the destination. That's probably how I would sum it up, John. How about yourself? Let me hear your take.
You know, I kind of, you know, to piggyback off that, it's like, you know, we use the whole, you know, traffic. We talk about the highway, and what this MTHFR course is going to do is allow you to take that map out of the glove box, unfold it, and be able to read it. You know, and that's kind of, you know, from my standpoint, is that I want people to be able to kind of read that map and know where you know, they're going based on their chronic health issues, and then be able to say, look up the map and be like, holy cow, there's traffic ahead. Where can I look down back at that map and maybe kind of redirect things a little bit to be able to get to where they need to be in a timely fashion. So, you know, and it's what I strive to do with my patients day in, day out. Unfortunately, in a clinical setting, you have limitations from a time standpoint. And so this is great. It's going to give people so much insight and so many tools to be able to take genetics and baseline information from their genetic test and be able to have a game plan and to be able to say, all right, these are the genes that are priority that relate to XYZ condition. This is the stuff I can do about it. These are the labs I need to maybe investigate or ask my doctor for. These are some of the things I should expect and maybe as a side effect. And if I experience this, then maybe I need to come back to this story, and really kind of help orchestrate and be able to teach people how to get from point A to point B assessing their genetics and the biochemistry. And I know you heard a lot of people over and over talking about it seems complicated. It seems complicated. We're limited here in a Facebook Live for, 30, 45 minutes to try and, bombard people with some information to get an understanding that, hey, there's more out there. You need to start asking your doctors, or you need to start asking why and start looking at a 30,000 foot view. Now we're going to do is transition into a 6-week course that is going to kind of ease things back, kind of take it slow, and kind of work people through 1 week at a time and give them a baseline foundation and build on it and build on it and build on it. And then in 6 weeks, as you would say, they're going to be MTHFR ninjas, and have a really good understanding that it's not just MTHFR, but how their MTHFR defects is a factor that plays into all these other things.
Yeah, and you know what, John, not only that, just to piggyback from what you just said, not to just get them out of this crisis, right? Because, and plural, but also like going forward, the verb component of it's going to happen again.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to have stress, right? And you're going to have some kind of trauma, knock on wood, hopefully not, but whether it's emotional or physical or the loss of a loved one, or just whatever it is. But now you know how to rein it in. Okay, based on your roadmap and based on your landmines, how do you navigate out of this terrain again? And you did it before, and you'll do it again. So that's what's so great about this course, and I'm so excited too, John. You guys are, Carol. The course starts tomorrow. We've been promoting this for a couple weeks now. It's at MTHFR CRASH COURSE.com. We'll put the link in the feed when we're done. It starts tomorrow. It's a 6-week live course, but you will get access to all of the replay videos for life. And you'll also get upgrades when John and I bring some upgrades to the top 5, 10, 15. Sometimes you'll get the most improved gene, right? And it will start to make the top 10. But you'll get access to that. And not only that, the PDFs, the handouts that accompanied the course, and then also the ability for the bonuses. We went over the bonuses, and the bonuses are super cool too. So make sure you sign up for that. And Brenda, you're so welcome. John and I love doing these meetings, and John putting all the work into getting these courses ready for you guys. Is going to be super awesome. So I don't know if there's any other questions. John, do you have any other things you want to add?
No, I think we, covered a lot of stuff tonight, and, I'm just excited and, already. And, so if somebody wants to jump on this and kind of learn this at a different level, that's really going to give them insight, because you made a great point. I tell patients all the time, Joel, this is your genetics. You're not going to fix this, but you're going to have tools and understanding of when that traffic is put back on the highway, what you can do the next time around so you can recover in hours to a day rather than suffering for weeks to months.
It is. And I've said this too, John, they're only 1 or 2 distinctions away from having their life back. Right? I mean, and it's what's so frustrating is people are putting a lot of work into their health. They're on the call. They're learning this stuff. You told me a long time ago, you better know your stuff, because the people that are going to come and see you are going to know their stuff. So there's no BSing it. These people know their stuff. They're working hard, yet they're so close, yet so far away from busting this wide open to the day where they don't have to think about, all they think about is being unhealthy. They get back to the life that they remember that they forgot, or they forgot they remember. It's just one of those things. And so anyways, John, I'm looking forward to this, and I will put the link to the feed to the course to be able to register in this. And then John and I go through any questions that you guys have. So make sure you ask whatever questions that you have. And we look forward to getting this started tomorrow. So, John, have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good, Joel. Take care.
All right,
bye.
You too. Bye.